Hello and welcome to the Back Row on Air Sport. Coming up on tonight's show, we'll look ahead to a bumper Saturday of autumn internationals alongside Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent and Brendan Fanning of the Sunday Independent. Guys, I was going to start with a bit of tackle technique a la Razzie Erasmus. Maybe we'll come back to that. First and foremost, Ireland, it feels like the start of the November test proper, Rory, doesn't it? Chicago was exciting for a little bit of the game in the second half, but how much did we really learn from that test?
I don't know if we can take too much from it. I'm sure Joe Schmidt felt it was an investment in a number of players who will be kind of wrapped up and put away now until the USA game at the end of the window. It was, this you can see in November we're going to step up each week until New Zealand and then have that one game at the end. And for all of Jordan Larmour's heroics, there was a number of players in the first half who look back on it with a bit of regret. I don't know if they all took the opportunity that was there. Thought Italy showed a little bit how you can actually stop this Ireland team. You can slow them down a little bit if you get on it, but they weren't good enough to make that count. And as soon as they scored the 2 tries after half time, the contest was gone, and it was all set up for Jordan Larmour to run riot. That's
interesting, like you talking about the tempo, because Ireland kept talking about this after the match. We couldn't get the tempo of the game. You think there's maybe a bit of blueprint there for playing Ireland?
Maybe a little bit. I think they got they were high at the breakdown. I think that they were doing those latch plays that were so successful in the Six Nations last year, but they were actually going over the latch and then missing the breakdown, so Italy could get in and slow the ball down. So then Luke McGrath was coming to rucks and it was messy. He was getting the ball slowly to Joey Carberry, who was then under pressure, and then his kicking wasn't particularly good either. So I think, look, it was patchy. It was a patchy week for Ireland. There was a poor preparation. Half the best players were at home, so a lot of guys who travelled knew they wouldn't be involved this week because the lad in their position was at home preparing for this week. Like, that's not ideal. Like, the fact that yesterday was the first time the whole squad got to train together is very unusual in this window. So it was a scratchy week. It was very hard to put together a cohesive performance. They don't have any excuses in this environment, or so they tell us, so that they won't look at it that way. But I'm sure when they look back at the end of the whole window, they'll excuse an awful lot of it. But at this stage, it wasn't particularly great, but still scored 50 points, won the game, got the job done.
It just had a chunk of the World Cup about it. I mean, it was the opening salvo in the World Cup. OK, the RFU made a couple of bob, not a huge amount of money, nothing compared to the gig a couple of years ago with the All Blacks. So the main advantage was, getting more time to look at more fellas with a view to Japan, not really about Chicago at all.
Yeah, what about the opposition this weekend? So the Pumas come to town. I guess a lot of people will be going to the stadium without having seen a lot of them this year. What can we expect from a new coaching ticket as well?
Yeah, I'd say Ledesma, Roger's old buddy, he would have rothered more time to prepare. I mean, Daniel Urquhart probably stayed on a little bit long, but Ledesma already has done reasonably well in the Rugby Championship. The RGs for me combine the absolute. It is the perfect combination between really mean, nasty, hard-edged, physical rugby up front, with a brilliant utilisation of space behind. And when they get that balance right, and when they've enough players to do that, and they're fit enough, then they're really, really good, as we found to our cost in the last World Cup. I guess a big question is if they can cope with the humongous travel schedule they've had to deal with. They haven't had quite as full a dance card this year as they had last year when we did them in Lansdowne Road. So it'll be interesting to see what physical shape they're in now.
Yeah, that back three, even like Delgui and Buffelli and Moyano, lethal. Like, it could be similar to 2015 if they get that ball into the wide channels with that space. Are they going to get that opportunity?
That's the big question, Murray. I mean, if you look at their record since the last World Cup, they do tend to time things so that they get it right around the World Cup. They're leaving it late this time. They've only beaten 4 tier 1 nations, I think 4 tier 1 nations in the entirety of the time since that last World Cup. They, as Bren says, Daniel Urquhart stayed on way too long. So Ledesma took over, having coached the Hagawari, so he's been in charge of this team pretty much for the season. Got them to the quarterfinals of Super Rugby, first time they'd ever done that. And he's trying to carry the momentum in. He did get away wins against South Africa and Australia in this window, but then he threw away a home win against Australia, having got themselves in a really strong position, but also had a chance to beat the All Blacks in Nelson, and the scrum let them down. And the one thing that they built their entire thing on was their scrum, and they don't have one now.
That mortifies them.
Yeah,
it really it's like the South Africans. If their scrum is going backwards, it bothers them.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting challenge. Ireland's front row will probably be quite confident because they're bringing frontliners back in, aren't they? Like Furlong, Healy, best expected back. All those guys who stayed at home last weekend and probably got prep done for this game. It's going to be a very different look, Ireland, in terms of leadership as well.
And even without those players, the second string and even the third string front row did major damage against Italy last week. I mean, Andrew Porter had a big game, Finlay Bealham comes on at a big game. Kilcoyne, Cronin off the bench, all had big games. You've got 9 front rows there who are playing well, and you still have John Ryan and a few others who are scattered across the globe this weekend as well. So Ireland's, we were talking to Greg Feek yesterday down in Carton House. He's done an amazing job in terms of building the depth. You know, that was never there. Even at the World Cup, Nathan White, who'd only just qualified to play for Ireland, was on the bench against Argentina, which is hard to believe at this point.
It's a transformation between now and then, and even if you go back to Chicago 2 years ago, Beelum came off the bench and everybody's thinking, Jesus, this guy Beelum is going to be fantastic. He looked really good against the All Blacks, and I think he probably started believing his own publicity and got out of shape. He's back in shape this season, and now Joe looks around and he has a whole clatter of people queuing up. It's
fantastic to see there's options everywhere. Like second row, Ty Byrne now, it looks really hard to leave him out, Brendan. Where does he fit in?
Well, we were talking about this before, and I would put him in at 6. Like pound for pound, I cannot think of a better all-round rugby player who does a little bit of everything, and he does all of those things extremely well, and he has a phenomenal work ethic. Plus, top it off with the bloke is never injured. He just plays game after game after game. So yeah, you'd say he'd be brilliant to bring off the bench after 55 minutes or whatever. I'd rather see him start. It's not going to happen, but I would love to see him start at 6.
I think he'll go back to the bench because of what we saw in that final test in Australia when the rest of the team were on their last legs, completely wiped out. It was Jordan Larmour and Ty Byrne won that game for Ireland. It was their carrying. They took the fight to Australia. Everyone else looked dead, and they were the ones. And I just think that energy that he brings, that turnover potential that he brings as well, just gives him the point of difference. Omani's your starter. Like, he's going to be your starter. He's fit, he starts. He's one of the leaders. He's the vice captain. He could end up being the captain at the World Cup if things go his way. I just don't see him dropping Omani. I can see the merits in playing Byrne.
He's not going to do it.
And I don't know if he's big enough as a scrummaging lock to start in scrum. But as a number 19 who can cover 6 and in the second row, I just think there's so much value in having him on that bench.
Yeah, and the back row looks really strong. Stander, O'Brien potentially back this weekend. What about 9? Conor Murray seems to have had a busy week outside of Ireland. Paris and Dubai. Looks like fun, but can we rule him out now with the All Blacks test? I know Ireland are saying...
We can definitely rule him out this week, and I think probably next week. But I think Marmion deserves a shot. He was the number 1 when he came in, when Murray got injured at the end of the 2017 Six Nations. He's never let Joe Schmidt down. I think he's done his time, and he deserves it. But he is under a bit of pressure. I know McGrath didn't go particularly well last week, but it wasn't a bad performance at the same time, and he's playing very well. And Cooney came on and would look pretty electric himself. And probably does a lot of the things. They both probably do a lot of the things that Murray does well, that Marmion probably is a little bit off on, but Marmion brings his own strengths, and you'd hope that if he does, look, it looks like he'll play this week. If he does, he'll bring those strengths, and he won't be afraid to make a break, and he won't try and be Conor Murray, which in fairness he didn't do against England that time.
And probably having Johnny Sexton there and Gary Ringrose and Henshaw in the midfield helps with that decision making. The back three is going to be interesting. We go out to Carton House yesterday, and Will Addison pops up for the press conference, unexpected. It looks like he may be involved this weekend, and I guess it's the perfect time to get a better sense of what he can do. He didn't really have a chance in Chicago to do that.
Well, in fairness, like from the moment he's landed in this country, he's done really, really well, and he's impressed everybody, no matter what position he's played in. And Schmidt likes him. And if you remember the way he was not quite smuggled into the camp, but it was all very convenient the way he rocked up to the Ireland camp in Australia. That wasn't just by chance, and Schmidt wasn't going to go to those lengths unless he was going to use this bloke. So why not use him now?
Yeah. What's your starting back three if everyone's fit?
If everyone's fit
for a World Cup match.
First choice for a World Cup match, I would go Rob Kearney, Jordan Larmour right wing, Keith Earls left wing.
Yeah, would you go along with that, Bryn?
I go Stockdale and Earls.
Yeah, you need that. I think you need that experience element of Earls there. Larmour, it's going to be interesting to see where he fits going forward, because he was good at fullback, but then he did a lot of damage on the left wing. What's his best position now?
Well, you'll know this time next year. I think he's learning. Oh God, beginning to sound like one of the coaches. He's learning as he goes, but like he is, he's still there's still a tendency for the 50% offload. But I think they'd probably knock that out of him. But everything else about him, he's actually a better footballer than people realise. He's not just a stepper, he's not just a runner. He can actually nudge the pill as well. So
yeah, going to be really interesting to see where Ireland go this weekend, selection-wise and in terms of their form. But coming up after the break, we'll look ahead to England against New Zealand and Wales's clash with Australia. You're very welcome back, Brendan. It's going to be an interesting event at Twickenham this weekend as well. Joe Schmidt will be watching closely. He gets a chance to look at the All Blacks. Are they as scary as they've ever been?
I'm not sure they are. Their concession of points over the last 5 games, 3 of which they've conceded more than 30 points. A bit like Kevin Keegan in the old days. It doesn't matter what we concede, we'll score more than you, which is very un-All Black. And when one of their coaching staff, Ian Forster, comes out and starts talking about how fresh they are, that's a bit of a bad. It's a warning that they're going to be really, really serious about this, and for them as well, this is laying down a marker. So with England up to the level that they're at after last week's getaway win against South Africa, it'll be well worth watching.
Yeah, I mean the All Blacks they're going to be World Cup favourites, deservedly so, but there probably are there are a few question marks certainly about this team.
Well, I think there's question marks over the quality of the Rugby Championship as a whole. So they're obviously, you can't question their quality, but the teams they're playing against have been going through a really difficult couple of years. None of them have really impressed since the last World Cup. South Africa are on the way back and really rattled their cages a bit this season. Australia are in a mess. Argentina, as we discussed earlier, haven't had a great kind of period. So they're coming up here not really knowing about themselves. They've been beaten by Ireland. Obviously, they've beaten Ireland as well. They've been beaten by the Lions. And this England game has been talked about for 3 years. The hype has probably gone out a bit since England have fallen off a cliff a little bit form-wise, but they'll be definitely targeting this game at Twickenham and the Aviva Stadium next week to show where they are, because I don't think they're quite sure. They've lost an awful lot of leadership. I don't think they're as strong as they were at this time 4 years ago when they had McCaw, Carter, all those great players steering the ship with the Bowden Barretts coming through. They still have so much talent, but they've even been undermined by all the players that come up to the Northern Hemisphere to play as well, a little bit. So I'd still think best team in the world by a mile and definitely favourites for both games, but I don't think they're in any way invulnerable.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the players coming out to play here, and Brad Shields, the England international, is one of those guys. Really interesting article in the New Zealand Herald, Brendan. A pretty scathing attack on him, and I would guess the source was Steve Hansen talking about the coaches and how I guess they've kind of lost respect for this guy who went out of New Zealand rugby and straight into the England camp. Is that a sign of the concerns they have around their players leaving?
Yeah, big time, and it is the biggest threat. I mean, they can't hack the salaries that the players are going to get paid up this end of the world. So every time one of them leaves, they can't just sit in their hands and say, "Oh well, best of luck, off you go." It is part of the political framework that you must come out and either slag him off for one reason or another, or say he wasn't quite up to it or whatever. But you can't just let it slide, because the second you start accepting that without any sort of argument at all, it encourages more fellas to go, and that is the biggest threat. I mean, it's a small country. Obviously, because rugby is such a big deal there, their playing numbers are better than most of us. But the player drain north is really what wrecks their heads.
Yeah, just briefly on England, Rory, did we see a bit of revival out of them last weekend? Did we see better from them?
We saw a revival of spirit, I think. I mean, they had such a bad year up until this date. The South Africa tour, their Six Nations performance was really poor. Ireland bullied them at Twickenham. I think the fact that they were able to hold out against the Springbok team that threw quite a lot at them, and the Owen Farrell incident was very, very controversial, but it was a game-winning moment from a key leader in the last play that he got away with a little bit. But that's the kind of thing that really infuses a lot of confidence and belief into a team, and a real backs-to-the-wall attitude going into this week, which probably suits Eddie Jones a little bit.
Big time.
Whether it's good enough to beat this All Blacks team, I'm not so sure. They have a collection of very good forwards. They have some good players at the back. They're very, very difficult to beat. Even when Ireland are at their best, they find England a tough nut to crack. But I don't know if they have the weapons that the All Blacks have.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately where, even on a bad day, Rico Ioane will probably score 2 tries for you, and Bowden Barrett will make breaks. But again, he's a guy who misses kicks, make bad decisions the odd time when the pressure's on. If you can hang in with them and put them into a difficult place, we're not sure. Yeah, and England have the capacity to do that at any team.
But their discipline is poor, so it would be interesting to see how many penalties, the kickable penalties they concede, and how many kickable penalties the All Blacks take or put over. Yeah. But certainly the reaction, like, geez, England were going. The Farrell, the method by which they won that game, it was like, here we go. It was terrific.
Yeah, and what about that incident? I mean, it's been talked about a lot. Rassie Erasmus immediately after the game said he's going to start practicing that tackle with his players, and he was actually true to his word. We saw this quite hilarious video emerging during the week of Esterhuizen, who was the victim of Farrell's tackle, let's say, actually practicing his technique. You can see Rassie a little bit higher. He goes a second time. This is really well staged. And Jack Nienaber, his defence coach.
The beauty of it is Esterhuizen's startled look at Rassie, like, oh, okay, this is a whole new idea, this high tackling business.
No arms.
And the smile as he walks away, you're actually making me do this. But that's Rassie's mischief aside.
Yeah, he's got his message out there. If Esterhuizen goes out and does it against France on Saturday, then he might be in a bit of trouble. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be taken literally, because any day of the week it's a penalty. I don't think it's a red card. I don't think he should have been cited, but I think Handré Pollard should have been given an opportunity to either kick to the corner or kick at the post, because there wasn't an arm in sight, and it was an illegal tackle in my book. He flaps his arms at it afterwards. You know, token attempt to wrap the arms. But really, by letter of law, that's an illegal tackle. And English Gardner should have. He gave himself the time of going to his TMO. He should have made that decision. Difficult position to make it in, but that's what he's there for.
It's funny if you go back to Schmidt's anger 2 years ago at the way the All Blacks responded against us a couple of weeks after Chicago, and how many tackles that went on that day would have been red carded under the current protocol, let's say, or the current climate. Given the current climate, where anything remotely above your chest has half the crowd screaming for a high tackle, how that didn't get picked up was I couldn't get over that.
Yeah, we'll see refs Holland that this weekend. Another interesting test in Wales. Michael Cheika's Wallabies are over. Wales obviously coming off the back of a win and looking like they're building towards the World Cup, I would suggest, but a really bad record against the Wallabies in recent times.
13 tests in a row.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It is unbelievable.
For teams that are evenly matched. Really.
Yeah, and lots of those tests in Cardiff have ended, even worse. It'd be better if they got beaten by 50. But they would come within a score, and just when you're getting down to the final straight, okay, the Aussies are going to win this. So I would say, for the first time in a while, Czech has been feeling pretty good about going into a test match. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, are they going to be contenders next year, do you think?
I think so. I think they've quietly built, over the last couple of years. Gallant, it's a swan song. He does tend to get it right for the World Cup. There's a lot of good players. We see it in the Pro 14 all the time. There's a lot of good players in Wales. There's a good been moving on. I know losing Warburton at the point of the World Cup cycle that it did was unfortunate, but at the same time he didn't play an awful lot in the last year or two, and they've managed to unearth a couple of good sevens. But then they just have this problem with beating Australia, and they kind of have a problem with beating a lot of the Southern Hemisphere teams, and it's kind of let them down under Gatland's time in charge. And probably the one opposition that they just don't want to be facing this week is Australia, because even when it saved us so many of Australia's seasons over the last 4 or 5 years, just pitching up in Cardiff and producing something out of nowhere. And they have so many athletes, so many good powerful players that we saw in the summer. Their top end players are still excellent, but that squad is not really as strong as it should be, and they've problems at 10. Yeah.
What about there's chat coming out of Australia? I just saw during the week about Pocock and Hooper playing together, and the potential for that partnership to break up coming into the World Cup, because Pocock is probably the best 7 in the world potentially, and he's not really playing 7. Is that a concern from you, do you think?
Look, if I had access to Pocock and Hooper, I'd happily play Hooper at 7 and Pocock at 8 and go and find a line out forward to play at 6.
Yeah.
Just to get the two of them on the field at the same time. But you can't put the two of them on the field without a line out forward, and that's a mistake that they've made in the past.
Well, the problem's a hooker as well. It showed in the summer tour as well. They've had so many issues in that department. 6 and 2 are the big problems.
Yeah, just briefly, Rory, Conor O'Shea's Italy have a big game against Georgia. It'll probably go under the radar slightly, but after all the calls for Georgia to be kind of included in the Six Nations, it's a big day for Italy. Well,
probably told a lot in the selection that Italy brought to Chicago. Conor O'Shea talked a big game about throwing shots at Ireland, but really this is the game. They want to keep Georgia down. They don't want to, open the door even a little bit to a Georgian the Georgians coming into the Six Nations, which is unfortunate, because if you want to actually grow the game, they should be getting in there. But
they should be given more tests.
They should.
Never mind the Six Nations. They should be like the number of tests. They had something like 4 tests in between the 2011 and 2015 World Cups. It's improving slightly, but it's a real case of the Big 8, the establishment countries, keeping the small guys down.
Yeah, well, a fascinating weekend ahead. We have plenty of live rugby on Air Sport Pack this Saturday. We start at 1:55 p.m. on Air Sport 1 as Italy hosts Georgia. Over on BT Sport 2 from 2:15 you can watch Scotland against Fiji. And to round off your evening on Air Sport 1, we have live coverage of France against South Africa from 8 p.m. OK, that's all we have time for on the back row tonight. My thanks to Brendan and Rory for coming in, and thanks to you at home for watching on. We'll talk to you again soon.